showed his disdain. "That's enough, Garrett," Turner snapped. "Director Turner, my uncle will be here soon." He said this confidently without even looking. When his uncle arrived, he planned to have him make Turner apologize. "How dare you fire me, especially in front of my employees? You won't get away with this," Garrett thought to himself. A few minutes later, the office door opened forcefully. In a deep, arrogant voice, Garrett's uncle Ambrose snarled, "Mark Turner, how dare you fire one of my employees?" Kevin was waiting with Turner in Garrett's office for Ambrose to show up. He was one of the vice presidents at Williams Media, and he was also Garrett's uncle. Minutes later, he angrily burst in the door. Garrett smiled when he saw his uncle walk in the room. He quickly ran up to him and said, "Uncle Ed, thanks for getting here so fast." Then Garrett lied about what had just happened in the sales office downstairs. As Ambrose listened to his nephew's story, his eyes fell on Kevin. "So this horrible situation is all your fault?" Ambrose asked him. "What did you say?" Kevin replied with a smile. Ambrose's eyes narrowed as he responded. "How dare you talk to me like that? You sure have a lot of nerve." "You'd be surprised at how much nerve I've got," Kevin said as he sat down on the sofa. Garrett pointed his finger at Kevin and shouted, "Who do you think you are? Nobody said you could sit down." Turner could only shake his head. Since Ambrose was already here, it meant the whole thing was out of his hands. "There's no quarrel between us, Mr. Turner, wouldn't you agree?" Ambrose asked him. Before Turner could say anything, Garrett whined. "But Uncle Ed, he said he wanted to fire me." His arms on his chest and looked at Turner arrogantly. "Is this true?" Ambrose said with a frown. "Yes, Uncle Ed, not only did he say he wanted to fire me, he embarrassed me in front of all the customers and even my employees," Garrett blubbered. "I told him you're my uncle, but he still wouldn't listen. He obviously doesn't have any respect for you." When Ambrose heard this, he frowned and looked over at Turner. "Mr. Ambrose, I've seen the surveillance footage from the showroom. It proves that this whole mess is entirely Garrett's fault. If you let me show it to you, you'll see that the company has no choice," Turner explained. "There's another choice that you seem to have ignored." Ambrose pointed toward the office door and said, "Mark Turner, as vice president of Williams Media, I must inform you that you have been terminated." Garrett smiled broadly as he saw the look of dejection on Turner's face. "Turner, I told you this would happen," Garrett said with contempt. "But if you make this worthless piece of crap apologize to me, I'll ask my uncle to keep you in the company." "Mr. Ambrose, you're quite an executive," Kevin said to Ambrose flatly. "Who said you could speak?" Garrett asked as he walked over to Kevin. "There's nothing you can do about this, and your buddy Turner can't do anything either." Kevin was getting tired of Garrett and got to the point. "What are you asking for?" When Garrett heard this, he smiled, thinking that Kevin was afraid. "It's simple," he said. "All I want is an apology. Apologize for being a worthless piece of crap." You could have heard a pin drop. Even Garrett's uncle felt that he had gone too far this time. But since Ambrose already had gone to the trouble to rush over to the office, he had to follow through on his threat. "Garrett, that's enough," Turner said in exasperation. Ambrose and Garrett didn't know it, but he was under orders to protect Kevin. He couldn't possibly let Kevin be humiliated like this and then report back to his director. "Turner, this is none of your business. To tell you the truth, I've never liked you," Garrett said arrogantly. "You know what? You can apologize too." Kevin stood up and walked slowly up to Edward Ambrose. "Are you sure you want to continue to let him do whatever he wants?" Kevin asked in an unusually confident tone. For some reason, when Ambrose looked into Kevin's eyes, he felt extremely uneasy. Garrett came up to Kevin from behind and grabbed his shoulder. "Didn't you hear what I said?" In a flash, Kevin turned around and defended himself by pushing Garrett away. Garrett, in a daze, rubbed his chin and moaned. "How dare you hit me? You'll pay for this. Remember, the Butcher family didn't get its reputation for taking crap from people like you." "Young man, aren't you going a little too far?" Ambrose asked Kevin. "Why don't you go downstairs and ask all the witnesses who's going too far?" Kevin replied. Ambrose responded sternly. "It looks like this isn't going to end peacefully." "I'm curious. How do you expect it to end?" Kevin retorted. "It's quite simple. You're going to apologize to Mr. Butcher, then you're going to give him an additional $75,000 to compensate him for all the trouble you've caused," Ambrose declared. Turner opened his mouth to complain, but Ambrose slapped him on the cheek before he could say anything. "You have no voice here," Ambrose told him. "You are no longer a Williams employee. If you don't leave now, I'll call security and have you thrown out." Seeing Ambrose strike Turner like that, Kevin decided that he'd had enough of this. "Mr. Ambrose, do you always hit employees during company meetings?" Then he added in a sarcastic tone, "You know, HR frowns on this kind of behavior." Ambrose answered, "If you can hit my nephew, then I can slap Turner," he continued. "Now apologize and give my nephew his compensation. Otherwise, you won't like what happens next." Kevin didn't answer. He just stared at him as he considered his options. "Uncle, finish him off," Garrett shouted angrily. Then he took out his phone and made a call. "Mr. Foster, where are you? Someone else is threatening to beat me up. Hurry up and bring some of your men to my office." After Garrett finished speaking, he hung up and turned to Kevin. "Now you're going to get your legs broken," he roared. "Well, you can try," Kevin replied. Garrett made a fist and started to take a swing at Kevin, but before he could even hit him, Kevin gave him a hard slap in the face. Garrett staggered and fell back into his chair. Kevin was surprised at how hard he had hit Garrett. He was only going to give him a slap to bring him back to his senses, but he was feeling a lot stronger than usual. "You shouldn't have done that," Ambrose snarled. "Did you like that? That's how you hit Turner just now," Kevin said calmly. Turner stared at Kevin blankly. He was starting to see that there was more to Kevin than meets the eye. Ambrose pulled out his phone and made another call to Foster. Where are you? Get up to Garrett's office right away. Then he put his phone back in his pocket. So, it looks like you plan to beat me to death, Mr. Ambrose, Kevin commented dryly. Apologize now or you won't make it out of here in one piece. You only have these two options. Ambrose's eyes were burning with anger. What if I don't choose either one? Kevin said. At that moment, the office door opened. A very professional-looking woman walked in, followed by a group of executives in suits. She spoke to Ambrose directly. Well, Mr. Vice President, are you working hard today? Ambrose forced a smile when he saw her. Miss Wilson, what brings you here today? Since Kevin hadn't been showing up to work much lately, Ambrose had taken advantage of the situation and passed along a lot of his work to Miss Wilson. Even though Ambrose was one of the company's vice presidents, he still didn't have as much authority as Miss Wilson. She didn't even look at Ambrose, but instead walked straight over to Kevin. Sir, I'm sorry I'm late, Miss Wilson said as she gave Kevin a very sincere handshake. Miss Wilson, what did you just call him? Ambrose asked as he stared at Kevin in shock. She turned around and gave him a very sharp look. Mr. Ambrose, this is the new chairman of the Williams Group. When he heard this, Ambrose's forehead began to sweat, and he started to hyperventilate. Garrett stared at Kevin in disbelief. Our CEO, Edward Ambrose said. He couldn't hide the panic in his voice. I'm flattered to hear you call me by my correct title, Mr. Ambrose. Kevin paused and looked him straight in the eye before continuing. I believe you were just saying something about kicking me out if I didn't apologize to Mr. Butcher. Ambrose shivered. Sir, I didn't know who you were. Please accept my sincerest apologies. After Ambrose said this, he glared at his nephew. So if I understand correctly, if I weren't the CEO, you would have had me thrown out in the street? Kevin asked. Ambrose didn't know how to answer. Then he turned and shouted at his nephew. Get over here. Garrett was still rubbing his cheek as he slowly walked up to Kevin. Sir. Garrett couldn't even look Kevin in the eyes. Go ahead, finish your apology, Ambrose said as he pushed his nephew forward like he was a little boy. Garrett's lip quivered and he said, Sir, I was wrong. Kevin looked at Garrett, then turned around and stared at Ambrose. When Ambrose saw Kevin staring at him like that, he became furious with his nephew for putting him in this position. He turned around and slapped him right in the face. Look at all the trouble you've caused. Do you still want the CEO to apologize to you? Ambrose said as he gave Garrett a couple more smacks. He turned around and addressed Kevin again. Sir, my nephew has made a serious error in judgment. His behavior is inexcusable. Please, let me handle this. Kevin glanced at Garrett, who was sprawled on the couch rubbing his cheek in pain. It looked like Ambrose may have knocked out one of his teeth. Well, that takes care of Mr. Butcher, but Mr. Ambrose, I believe you made a few threats of your own, Kevin replied. Suddenly, the office door was violently kicked open. A man walked in with a few stocky young men. Mr. Ambrose, why did you call us here in such a hurry? What's going on? Foster asked as he stood there confused. What are you doing here? Ambrose yelled. Sir, did I do something wrong? Why are you yelling at me? Foster asked. Now he was even more confused. Ambrose wanted Kevin to forgive him, so he acted like this was all a big mistake. Who told you to kick the door open? And why did you bring so many men in here? Foster didn't know how to answer. He'd only rushed over because Ambrose's call sounded so urgent. Ambrose saw that he needed to get rid of the gangsters, so he said, I'm fine. This is a simple misunderstanding. Please take your men and leave. Foster shook his head in confusion and left with his men. Then Ambrose walked to the door and slowly closed it. It was the exact opposite of his attitude when he'd burst into the office a while before. Sir, Ambrose began to speak in a much more respectful tone as he walked back to face Kevin. I don't want anything like this to happen again, Kevin said as he put his hand on Ambrose's shoulder. Then Kevin walked over to Garrett and sat down next to him. He said, So, Mr. Butcher, are you still going to have my legs broken? I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know who you were, Garrett said in defense of his actions. Kevin slowly stood up. He looked down at Garrett and asked him, So this is how you apologize? Ambrose was disappointed in his nephew, but Garrett understood what Kevin meant. After taking a deep breath, Garrett struggled to stand up. Then he said, with as much sincerity as he was capable of showing, Sir, I was wrong. I'm sorry, your voice was too soft. I couldn't hear you clearly, Kevin said with a slight smirk. Mr. Williams, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. His eyes were welling up with tears. Kevin turned to Miss Wilson and said firmly, Edward Ambrose is demoted but will continue to work in the company. His original position will be taken over by Mark Turner. Garrett Butcher is terminated. After giving her these instructions, Kevin left the office without even looking back. When he got to the first floor, Lily and Rachel were still waiting for him. Lily immediately walked up to him, touched his arm, and asked, Are you all right? Kevin looked at her in surprise. This was the first time he could remember Lily showing so much concern for him. Then Kevin smiled and replied, Of course I'm fine. Vice President Ambrose, who works for Williams, came over to find out what had happened. Then he apologized to me. Lily, I told you he'd be fine, Rachel said. But when she saw Kevin looking at her, she quickly closed her mouth and didn't say anything else that might divulge his secret. Where have you been for the past 2 days? Lily asked in a tone that was mixed with a little concern but a lot of curiosity. I found a job, he explained. The salary is pretty good and it also provides food and lodging. That's pretty good. A smile suddenly appeared on Lily's face. At the same time, Lily felt a great sense of relief. She was starting to feel that Kevin was finally willing to make progress. Yes, Kevin said calmly. Rachel almost laughed out loud. Knowing Kevin's real identity, she thought the idea of the new CEO of Williams Media going out to find a job was hilarious. Suddenly, Lily got a puzzled look on her face. Kevin, don't you plan to come home? She wasn't sure why she'd said this. They hadn't been getting along for a long time, but now, after being apart for just 2 days, she felt uneasy. Kevin thought about it for a while and then replied, "Let's talk about it later. I've been a little busy lately. It's rare to have a boss who trusts me this much. He even asked me to come down here and buy a home for him." Lily didn't ask who it was. After all, there were a lot of rich people in Chicago. Then she asked nervously, "Why did you take my place as Bradley's hostage? Weren't you afraid?" Kevin looked at Lily lovingly and replied, "You're my wife." Lily felt her heart flutter. Then her phone rang. Glancing at the caller ID, she saw that it was from her company. Lily said a few words and hung up. "I'm sorry, but I have to go now. There's something I need to take care of at work. Take good care of yourself." After Lily said this, her eyes started to fill up with tears. "Sure, you take care of yourself too. See you in a few days," Kevin said. Then Lily tugged on Rachel's arm and turned around quickly to leave. Kevin was happy that his last conversation with Lily had gone so well. Now that he was the owner of the penthouse at Corwin Tower, he needed to spend a few days buying everything he needed. It was an enormous 2-floor apartment with its own private elevator, so it took a lot of effort. After he'd arranged everything, he had a little free time. So he called Lily early in the morning. "Hi, Kevin. When are you coming back?" she asked. She didn't even give him a chance to answer. "I'll be waiting for you at home." Lily hung up the phone with a smile. Once Lily knew that Kevin would be back later that day, she decided not to go to work. Instead, she washed up and got dressed in one of her nicest outfits. "Why are you letting that guy come back? Didn't he abandon you?" Dorothy looked at Lily, who was sitting on the sofa combing her hair, and said, "I went to a lot of trouble to introduce you to Garrett Butcher. How did that go?" "Don't ask me again. I'm not going to divorce Kevin," Lily said without looking up. This really upset Dorothy. "Why did you ever marry him? He lived in our house for free for almost 3 years. All he did was offer himself in a hostage exchange, and now you're ready to run back to him." Lily put down her comb and let out a sigh. "Kevin saved you too, or have you forgotten that?" "You want me to thank him for such a small thing? Never!" Dorothy slapped the table hard. Dorothy continued her tirade. "Let me ask you this. During the 3 years you and Kevin were married, were you ever happy? Can he give you the life you want? Every other wealthy family I know has successful son-in-laws. Some of them are worth millions. How does Kevin compare to them?" Dorothy's complaining was interrupted by the sound of an engine out in the street. She looked out the window and was astonished to see Kevin getting out of a brand new sports car. "I'm back." Kevin smiled and waved at Dorothy. Dorothy looked at Kevin in shock and then looked at the sports car parked outside. "Kevin?" Dorothy asked in disbelief. Kevin nodded slightly at Dorothy. Then he walked into the living room and said to Lily with a smile, "I'm back." Lily looked at the sports car parked in front of the house. She wasn't sure what to make of it. "That's my boss's car. Because I'm taking the day off, he lent it to me," Kevin explained with a smile. Before Lily could say anything, Dorothy interrupted. "Ah, so it's your boss's car. For a second I thought you were doing better financially." Kevin shook his head a little and smirked when he heard her say that. He was used to Dorothy's attitudes towards him, and it looked like things hadn't changed. "Still a good-for-nothing, I see." Dorothy looked at Kevin's indifferent expression, and it only made her more irritated. Dorothy turned around and looked at Lily as she continued her attack on Kevin. "I just don't understand. What are you waiting for? Wasn't Garrett Butcher good enough for you? This is making me sick." "Mind your own business, Mom," Lily said with a sigh. "He's found a job now, so I want to give him a chance to show me he's changed." Dorothy didn't argue with her. She just glared at Kevin and went into her room. "So, we're not getting a divorce?" Kevin asked Lily with a smile. "That depends on how things go," Lily said very calmly. Kevin didn't say anything else. No matter what decision Lily ended up making, he would respect her wishes. When he thought about it, Lily had always put a lot of pressure on him. Lily looked over at Kevin a couple of times. For some reason, she was starting to blush. "I'm going to head upstairs to rest." Kevin followed her upstairs. After he entered the bedroom, he saw how messy it was. "It looks like no one has cleaned in a few days." He began tidying up. Dorothy walked in and saw Kevin cleaning like everything was back to normal. She angrily took out her phone and dialed Garrett's number. "Aunt Dorothy, what do you want?" His voice wasn't very warm. Dorothy didn't pay any attention to that and got straight to the point. "Garrett, did you have a nice date with Lily? How are you guys getting along?" Dorothy's tone was extremely gentle, as if Garrett had already become her son-in-law. Garrett sounded very anxious. "Aunt Dorothy, I think Lily and Kevin are a match made in heaven. I don't want to come between them." This really surprised Dorothy. She asked him, "Are you okay, Garrett? What are you talking about? Kevin's nobody compared to you." "Aunt Dorothy, I'm absolutely serious. If you see Kevin again, please tell him I said hi. You can also tell him that I wish him and Lily many years of happiness." Dorothy looked at her phone with a confused expression on her face. She was wondering if she called the wrong number. "Garrett, is there something wrong?" Dorothy asked hesitantly. "No, Aunt Dorothy, there's nothing wrong. Nothing at all. I still have some work to do, so I have to get going. Bye." Then he immediately hung up the phone. Dorothy angrily threw her phone onto the bed. She really didn't understand what was going on with Garrett. She was certain that he had said that he was interested in Lily. Suddenly, there was a knock on the front door. Dorothy frowned slightly and walked over to answer it. "Who is it?" "Hi, Aunt Dorothy." She opened the door and Rachel walked in. "Hi, Rachel. Please have a seat," Dorothy said with a smile. She turned around and shouted upstairs, "Lily, Rachel is here." When Lily walked downstairs, she sat down on the sofa next to Rachel and started chatting with her. Dorothy shouted upstairs again, "Kevin, what are you doing? Come down here." When Rachel heard this, her smile turned into a look of surprise. She gulped and asked Lily, "Is Kevin home?" Ever since Rachel found out who Kevin really was, she didn't dare to come over and visit Lily. The night before, when she was talking to Lily on a video call, she found out that Kevin hadn't been home in a few days, so she figured it was safe to come over and hang out with her friend. She certainly didn't expect Kevin to actually be there. He just came back today. Lily didn't notice the change in Rachel's expression. Just as Rachel was about to find an excuse to head home, she saw Kevin walking slowly down the stairs. When he saw Rachel, he gave her a slight smile. "What are you still standing there for? Make a cup of coffee for Rachel," Dorothy snapped at Kevin. But he just stood there on the bottom step, leaning lightly on the handrail. Rachel stood up and said, "Oh, you don't need to go to any trouble. I'm not thirsty." Lily frowned at her friend. "Rachel, you don't seem to be yourself. Are you okay?" Lily asked her with a hint of doubt in her voice. "That's possible. Maybe it's because I didn't get enough sleep last night," Rachel explained. But Dorothy also felt that something was wrong. She thought about the strange conversation with Garrett and now Rachel's odd behavior. "Why is everyone so afraid of this bum?" Dorothy thought to herself. "Then go to the fridge and get her some fruit," Dorothy barked at Kevin. "No need, Aunt Dorothy. I still have some things to do, so I have to head home. I just stopped by to say hi." Rachel was afraid of what she'd say if she stayed there any longer. Kevin hadn't said a thing, but Rachel couldn't stand the pressure. "Oh, don't leave so soon. Why don't you stay a little longer?" Kevin asked with a smile. "I really have something to take care of, so I've got to run," Rachel said apologetically. "Okay, we won't keep you," Lily said. She looked at Kevin and then back at Rachel and asked her, "How did you get here? I didn't see your car." "It's in the shop," Rachel forced a smile. "I'll just take a cab or something." "You don't need to pay for a ride," Dorothy said. "Kevin's got his boss's car today. He can drive you home." Rachel looked at Dorothy in surprise. Didn't she know who Kevin really was? "That's too much trouble. I'll be fine." Rachel was on the verge of tears. "Rachel, why are you being so polite to him? He'll only hang around here and do nothing," Dorothy replied. Kevin sighed. He pulled his keys out of his pocket and said, "It's no problem, Rachel. Let's go." At this point, Rachel had no choice. She grabbed her purse, said goodbye to Lily and Dorothy, and headed out the door with Kevin. As she got in, she noticed that Kevin's new car was a Maserati coupe, a pretty modest choice considering what he could have bought. After a few minutes, Rachel said timidly, "You can just drop me here, Kevin. I can really take a taxi home." Kevin steered with one hand while he adjusted the stereo with the other. "What did you just call me? Have you forgotten already?" "Boss," Rachel said softly. "That's better." Kevin smiled and said, "Don't be so nervous, Rachel. As long as we're already out, I might as well drop you off at home. Anyway, I don't have anything else going on today." "Thank you, boss," Rachel said. Kevin laughed and turned onto Michigan Avenue. While he was waiting for a traffic light, he heard a voice in the car next to him. "Isn't that Kevin? So you're driving a fancy sports car now?" Kevin looked over and saw that it was Jason. Unfortunately, traffic was starting to back up, so he couldn't hit the gas and get away from him. "Kevin, you sure are living well now. That car must have cost what, $200,000? After Jason said that, he looked in the passenger seat and saw Rachel. "I see you found a lovely rich woman to support you. And who is this pretty lady?" "Don't bring her into it," Kevin said coldly. "Kevin, you're just a poser," Jason replied. In fact, when Jason saw Rachel, he figured the sports car was really hers. Then he assumed Kevin had found a rich woman to pay for his lavish lifestyle. "Kevin, you really are amazing. You've had free room and board for 3 years with Lily, and now you're looking for another rich woman to support you? I should have known." Jason sneered and revved his engine. Because Jason was making so much noise, the pedestrians who were waiting to cross the street heard everything. Their comments were pretty insulting. "So he's married into the Joneses family?" Another commented, "I'm a handsome guy. Why can't I find a rich woman to buy me a car?" This was pretty frustrating for Kevin, and he started to lose his temper. But Rachel, who had been sitting calmly in the front passenger seat, got even more angry than Kevin. The traffic wasn't moving at all, so she opened the car door and walked over to Jason's window. Suddenly, everyone heard a loud slap. "You actually hit me? Do you know who I am?" Jason was a little surprised. The young woman who was sitting in Jason's car was also shocked. She said to Rachel, "This is one of the most important people in the Jones family." "So what? What are you going to do about it?" Rachel glared at Jason. Because Jason had no class, he said loudly, "Not only does this beauty have a hot body, she also has a hot temper." Then he added, "She really ought to be with me." The bystanders who were anxiously waiting for the light to change spoke quietly to each other, but nobody said anything that might risk provoking Rachel. Rachel glanced at Kevin and saw the smile on his face. This gave her even more confidence. With the support of Williams Media CEO, what was there for her to be afraid of? She put her hands on her hips and said, You're nothing compared to Mr. Williams." "Mr. Williams?" Jason wondered. The onlookers were stunned. Jason also looked surprised. Rachel turned around and walked back to Kevin. She leaned in the passenger window and said, "Boss, I did well, didn't I?" "You did really well." Kevin smiled with satisfaction. "Boss, it's backed up all the way to Lakeshore Drive. You don't have to take me home. I don't want to waste your time," Rachel continued. "I'll go a few blocks west and catch a ride. Don't worry about me." "Okay, be careful," Kevin nodded slightly. Rachel reached in, took her purse off the front seat, and crossed the street. The onlookers broke up pretty quickly when the light changed and the traffic was able to inch forward. As the car started to move, Jason yelled at Kevin, "Lily's going to hear about this." "Have you already forgotten the lesson that Drake taught you?" Kevin reminded him. The lane opened up in front of Kevin, so he put the accelerator down and jumped forward, finally ending the conversation. "Lily must have pulled some strings to buy him a sports car with our family money," Jason whined as he watched Kevin's taillights disappear ahead of him. If Kevin had heard what Jason said, he'd definitely find it funny. He just bought this car yesterday, and the Jones family hadn't paid a cent. As long as he was downtown, Kevin decided to head to his office and wait for traffic to clear. He sat down at his desk and sent Lily a text saying that he wouldn't be home that night. Just then, Miss Wilson walked into the office with 2 small boxes. She put them on the large meeting table and said, "Mr. Williams, these were sent over by President Wright at West Chicago International and Mr. Cook from the Whistler Hotel. They said they're a gift for you." "Adriana and Mitch?" Kevin put down his phone. What could this be? He wondered. Yes, sir, Miss Wilson nodded. There was a